Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberai, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 61 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But more importantly, we are 1 week. It's been 1 week since the CDC has relaxed the mask mandate. And I think that's going to be the new number that we talk about from now on because everyone is pretty excited about coming out of this long period of time. In the news today, the House passed a bill to create a commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, and the value of Bitcoin has dropped about 50% in the last 2 weeks. Today's topic is wellness in the workplace, and we're joined by an amazing panel. Paul Scialla, the founder and CEO of Delos, and the founder of the International Well Building Institute, Rachel Hodgdon, the CEO of IWBI, and my colleague and partner in crime at Savills, Wendy Feldman, aka Wellness with Wendy. So great to see you all. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks to be here.
I think, Paul, you're at this little bit of a nexus with kind of representing two of the groups here in the conversation and kind of being a leader in the wellness movement. Maybe you can kind of kick things off for us and tell us, why would you leave this cush job at Goldman and kind of really embrace this movement and start Delos and IWBI? Give us the quick story here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us. This is Paul Scialla, founder and CEO of Delos and founder of our International Well Building Institute. It's interesting, Ken, we've been merging the health sciences with the building sciences for almost a decade. The first half of that, pure research, put a lot of capital in to get a whole incredible platform of doctors and medical practitioners to collaborate with real estate professionals of all types. Owners, operators, developers, architects, engineers, HR professionals, basically to best understand our indoor environment and its impact on the human condition. We went deep on everything you could imagine that surrounds people inside, given we're all spending most of our lives inside of any type of space, whether that's our homes, offices, schools, hotels, what have you. So looking at air quality, water quality, lighting, thermal, acoustics, biophilic elements, operational protocols, HR policies, mapping things like those to our respiratory, cardiovascular, immune, cognitive, digestive, and sleep health outcomes. And ultimately, as mentioned, after a good body of work was formed, 2015 was the launch of our well building standard and our International Well Building Institute. And Rachel is leading the way there.
So Rachel, give us a quick kind of peek at what the last 57, how many weeks did I say? 61 weeks has been like for you, right? You've been talking about wellness, obviously, for these last few years. Pandemic hits. What's accelerated? What are people talking about? How's it been like for you running an organization remotely and then kind of leading in this advocacy space that's so timely?
I mean, it's been quite the ride. On the one hand, as the leader of an organization, just like any CEO, we're in the middle of a public health crisis, one that's layering sort of emergency on top of emergency, from COVID-19 transmission to mental health challenges. But as IWBI, we have seen enormous growth. Almost as soon as we knew the virus had touched down here in the United States and in Europe, we were enrolling more than 2 million square feet of real estate in well every single day. It took us 66 months or so to reach 600 million square feet of enrolled space for well certification. It took less than 6 months to enroll that many square feet in the Well Health Safety Rating, which is a pandemic-inspired product that we launched to address acute health threats in the built environment through operations and management practices.
Amazing. And Wendy, one of the reasons why I wanted you to be here is, since we've been partners on so many transactions in the past, you've always been talking about wellness and why people should care and persuading me that we should make this part of our pitch and our conversation with clients. Tell everyone a little bit about kind of the success you've had in actually getting a well deal done and why it's so important for tenants and why they care more today maybe than before.
So thank you, Ken. I was given a gift back in 2015 when my client, American Society of Interior Designers, announced that they wanted to pursue well, and nobody really knew what that was. I was Googling it. And I was really proud that under the expert leadership of then CEO Randy Pfizer, we helped ASID achieve the first well and LEED Platinum project in the world. And I learned so much about it, and I became an evangelist of sorts. But I didn't find an audience as receptive as I would have liked. Landlords didn't really understand what it meant. Other tenants, even in my own firm, I kept talking about it and people weren't really getting what it was. It didn't mean that people didn't care about wellness, but they weren't making that link. And I have to say that COVID was separate from the devastation, loss of life and businesses and people losing their jobs, it was a silver lining for me, because all of a sudden people were like, oh, wait, that's what she's been talking about. And so for me, from that standpoint, I've been so excited. And one of my last in-person panels that I moderated, Rachel came in, we had Randy Pfizer, and we talked about wellness. And the audience was lapping it up. But that was February of 2020, and then the whole world changed. So I would say that we have seen a wholesale embrace of understanding it, and people realize that this is not just a short-term reaction to this crisis. This is a new way of thinking, and I'm excited to be part of that discussion in the community.
So look, I want to dive into the details about certification and all this, but just high level, I want to really kind of make clear, because one of the things that Wendy's helped educate me on, and that we've seen from her past clients and now with current clients, is it's not only about health and wellness and doing the right thing. There's a good bottom line kind of attribute to this, right? There's a big economic impact related to embracing this. Paul, why don't you talk a little bit about that, right? Because I think that's important to understand about your background, where you came from in the financial services industry, and the case that you make to developers and to tenants who sometimes are maybe a little more brass tacks about the economic impact here. I think that'd be interesting to kind of hear how that's evolved over the last 18 monds.
Yeah, no doubt. We've always looked at this through an economic lens, candidly first. Taking a $200 trillion asset class, real estate, the largest in the world, and merging it or infusing it with the fastest growing industry in the world, health, wellness, prevention, nowadays health safety, multi-trillion-dollar a year spend, using our real estate as a healthcare intervention tool to constantly and passively introduce prevention and elements that optimize things like productivity, attraction, retention, reducing healthcare costs. These are all bottom line elements. You think of the green building movement, $5 trillion industry over 15 years, addressing what amounts to be 3% of the ongoing cost of a building. It's energy usage, right? Waste, water, consumption, what have you. And that's got an interesting ROI to it, and thankfully it's become mainstream. But when you consider over 90% of the cost of any building, not three, over 90% of the ongoing cost of the building are the people inside of it. Salaries, wages, benefits, productivity, healthcare costs, attraction, retention. The well building movement is actually a 40, 50 time bigger economic opportunity than the green building movement. These are basic elements that, to Wendy's point, we've seen great adoption over 5 years of the well building movement. But what happened last year is people around the world, and unfortunately it took a global pandemic to be a bit of a catalyst for this, but people around the world realized one very simple thing, that what surrounds us matters. What we touch matters, what we breathe matters, at times how we gather indoors matters, the type of lighting that enters our circadian optic nerve determines our energy levels and productivity hormones, and will also dictate how we sleep. This fundamental relationship between you and what surrounds you has been what this platform's been about. And taking an evidence-based approach to this, quantifying, putting metrics to it, putting the ability to third-party verify these attributes, and then, oh, by the way, just an explosion in ESG reporting when it comes to human capital management. Well has become the centerpiece for enterprise. Almost 100 of the Fortune 500 already using these programs to report on human capital management. So this is an economic proposition first that happens to have a tremendous potential societal impact. And it's the way we've always looked at this well-building movement.
So Rachel, a little bit of the conversation so far has been about office. And I think I incorrectly titled this Wellness in the Workplace. And I was listening to one of Paul's previous conversations he had a couple of weeks ago, I think. And he noted like this, really, this sector kind of covers anything with a door, right? So like, tease that out. Like, how are you and how's your organization thinking about just even expanding the lens of focus on wellness to just like everything, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about office, but this is like retail, homes, everywhere we are. I mean, the amount of time we spend indoors is what, 90% of our lives? I mean, it's unbelievable. So what's the kind of magnitude of the scope and kind of, maybe any pivots you're making in terms of like raising awareness in other asset classes?
Well, it's been fascinating, the kinds of trends that we've seen play themselves out pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. We do certify basically anything with a door, with the single exception of single family homes, which we're actually working on developing new pathways for as I speak. But what we've seen is a massive acceleration in a number of sectors where we not only saw low participation in well prior to the pandemic, we saw low participation even with green building certification, like hospitality, for instance, and retail. These are often organizations that saw the affiliation with a green building certification as, being contradictory to the 5-star experience, to the ideal guest experience. I when I started working at IWBI, I was commuting between DC and New York, and I essentially lived out of a suitcase in a hotel for the first couple of years. And it was several years in that I realized that the hotel I had so meticulously chosen was a LEED certified hotel. And when I asked the hotel management, like, where is this in your marketing materials? Like, why aren't you promoting this? Of course, like, I'm not a typical guest, but I sort of project myself onto everyone. Like, who doesn't want operable windows and a high performing HVAC system and quality acoustics? Like, every guest asks those questions. And they said, no, actually, quite the contrary. Our guests would view that association with green as like giving up a hot shower with good water pressure, or like, having my sheets changed on the regular. And I think now what we're seeing is that not just wellness, but well-being, which is really much more, I think, evidence-based, science-based, is being associated with, with luxury, but in general with taking care of whoever is inside of that space. So we've seen a massive acceleration of interest in industrial and warehouses, where they're looking to recruit a new generation of talent that's highly educated, highly trained, and doesn't want to work in their father's factory. And so they're using well as a recruitment mechanism. We see a huge acceleration in entertainment venues, in sports, in stadiums and arenas. We've seen a massive acceleration in education, because we got to figure out how to get kids back to school in the safest way possible. Well offers that evidence-based roadmap for any space type.
So one of the things that we do at Savills, and Wendy and I focus on, is we really exclusively represent tenants. And I think there's been an interesting dynamic in the marketplace right now where really, I think traditionally it's landlords dictate to tenants what the terms are, what the situation is, and then tenants dictate to their employees, like, you're in 5 days a week, this is how it is, like, you park here and this is what you do. It seems like this entire thing is flipped upside down as a result of COVID and because of the tenant-friendly nature in most markets, right? So this really seems to be now crowdsourced up. Employees are telling employers, based on surveys we're seeing, I'm only really want to come in this many days a week. And now, employers are now telling landlords, this is what we're expecting from the building. How, Wendy, is this power dynamic shift impacting the market in general, what tenants are expecting and desiring on a macro level?
So before COVID, I mentioned earlier that there was not as much of a focus and or understanding on wellness. And I worked on coming up with my own vocabulary and went out there and proselytized a lot, particularly in the DC area. I would meet with owners, try to educate them about it after my experience with ASID. And what I have found is at this point, it is really important, as companies are trying to get their employees to come back, that they let them know first, what is the building doing? What did they change? Because air quality is probably one of the biggest things. I know there's a whole menu of components, but that's the one that people, because of COVID, have been most concerned with. And their vocabulary has changed because the companies as well as their employees have learned so much more about questions to ask. Well, what kind of MERV filters are you using? What is the fresh air intake? And these are things that employees who've been working from their homes are scared about coming back. So, and I think, Rachel, you mentioned, it all goes back to communication. Like you said, with a hotel, you can do all this great stuff, but if you're not communicating that to people, you're missing a really important opportunity. And I think that from a retention as well as future recruitment, which is a whole nother subject, because I do think we could see a lot of movement where people didn't move during the pandemic, is going to be important. So we're pushing our clients to be looking to the owners to come back and answer questions. Like, for example, when we are trying to choose which buildings to look at, there's more options out there for most requirements than we know what to do with. So we put together a checklist and decide whether it's a particular building that someone wants. And if it's a public corporation where ESG is important, we'll make sure to understand if that's a building that's doing that. We'll want to know what wellness certifications they have, or more importantly, are planning to get. And we want to ask all of those questions about air quality and things of the sort. And then we're going to use that in our RFP documents. And so we've been continuing to develop and refine these tools. And I think that we are seeing that the market, I'm still continuing to educate. They still don't get it. They'll say, well, it's well. I'm like, is it well, or is it well health safety? So we're still working on that. We have a little way. I do think that your campaign was pure genius because it was so critical what you did. And I'm kind of kidnapping, but I just want to throw this out there is, when I was on these calls, I was saying earlier, Rachel and I were on a panel together I moderated in February of 2020. And then the whole world changed in March. And you all showed so much vision in pulling together over 600 experts and coming up with well health safety in what, like 90 days? And to me, what you have done is provide us collectively with a path back to life. As Ken said, not just to the office, but to our lives, to sports venues, to theaters, to restaurants, all of that in a really well orchestrated campaign that now when I talk about it, more and more people said, oh yes, I saw those ads. So kudos to you all. I'm thrilled to see wholesale adoption of it by landlords, because to me, that's the first place. Because if they have that on their building, it's much easier for me to help our clients pursue either well or well health safety. And I think that that's going to help differentiate them in the marketplace when they're competing for talent.
So look, Paul, this has been a big validator for Wendy, right? Like she can now say, Lady Gaga's talking about this, like you should pay attention to it. So why don't you piggyback on that, right? Talk a little bit about this kind of grassroots awareness influencer effort. Like how important is that? What are you seeing in terms of like that movement now in reality, right? This is actually like something that's now crowdsourced, ground up, employees care about it. So now companies and landlords, how important is that? And then also maybe just give us some quick thoughts on like, who are the big advocates that you're seeing? Like the Yankee stadiums, the Empire State Buildings, the Larry Finks of the world now. Like tell us a little bit about that on a tangible basis. So the movement and then who's doing it right kind of thing.
Yeah, happy to do so. And it's interesting because with now over 2 billion square feet in over 90 countries, either well certified, well health safety rated, or enrolled to be so in any of the well programs, it starts with the science, as mentioned. Our task force led by U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona, Dr. Stacy Riza up at Mayo Clinic, and over 500 virologists, behavioral scientists, public health experts, building scientists, they convened. And it was so fascinating to see. I think it was 15 original features of the full body of work of the original well standard held true to pathogen compliance and health safety concerns. So we pulled those forward, added additional criteria, and launched the health safety rating. And then to your question, we felt it was really important, okay, as this started to really enter the public consciousness, to combine people of reach and influence, the attention getters, if you will, okay, with people of credibility and science in a Look for the Well Seal campaign. That campaign has gotten over 3 billion media impressions already. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone of any walk of life, in the United States and ultimately globally, who has not at least gotten that general sense of awareness. Those 4 magic letters, WELL, in their head, okay, a seal, that symbol of confidence that represents scientific rigor and most importantly, third-party verification. And it's adopted broadly, everything from a nail salon up to an airport and everything in between. Yankee Stadium, Empire State Building, JP Morgan Chase has put the well seal on all 6,000 bank branches globally and all global offices, T-Mobile retail stores, Brookfield Properties, 200 million square feet in North America through the health safety rating. So restaurants, offices, hotels, schools, basically, as we said, if it's got a front door, it can be rated and it can achieve the parameters that represent the gap we've all seen, this lack of consistency and evidence and science as it pertains to health and safety protocols in, oh, by the way, the largest carrier of a viral load such as this, our real estate, the indoors. Airborne, surface-borne, behavioral-borne. Rachel and her team, hats off. When we gave the directive to go big on this, get it right, take that same evidence-based approach and put something out there that was scalable, we accomplished that. And then with the awareness behind it, we've got companies large and small, SMEs, public companies, they'll call us up and say, my employees are constantly seeing this awareness campaign of the health safety seal. And guess what? They're asking us, where is our seal? So this has really been a good pull for all types of companies and just, broadly speaking, the population at large. And I do think that this is the first time you've seen that crossover of a true sustainability initiative actually enter that much of a mainstream consciousness. And that's exciting for decades to come.
So Rachel, we used to spend a little bit of time, I think, pre-pandemic talking about the principles about the well standard, right? Like educating people and like, this is what you can aspire to. And, you may not get the certification, but this is kind of what to keep an eye out. It seems post-pandemic, to piggyback on what Paul said, certification matters, right? Like actually doing this right matters. Like actually holding your landlord accountable matters, and ensuring year after year, the quality and the standards are met. Talk a little bit about that. Like how important is the actual certification, having that logo? Why should employees and employers be looking for that? And then how should they be putting pressure on their landlords to make sure they are?
Well, I mean, I think that we've seen that third-party certification was always important, but it is more important today than it ever has been before. It's simply not enough for an employer, for an owner or operator of a building to say, like, just trust me, I've done the right things. That seal, that plaque, it's a kind of shorthand that suggests that, look, we've not only done the right things, but we've been checked and validated by a third party. It's bridging the confidence gap in getting people back to the places where we live our lives. And so I think that, what we're seeing right now is a kind of trickle up effect that's happening, where you've got, consumers, you've got tenants who are asking for this, who are making demands, like Paul said, who are calling their businesses, and that in turn applies pressure to organizations to really think about how they're communicating and committing and validating and verifying those best practices that are in place. And that ultimately has a massive shift on real estate. So, prior to the pandemic, I was sitting with a very forward-thinking REIT. They're both a property developer and property manager. And they have properties worldwide. And they said, because of our engagement with the WELL program, we have re-envisioned our core business. And we now think of ourselves as partners to our tenants in recruiting and retaining the best talent. So I think prior to the pandemic, what we saw were businesses were seeing WELL as a vehicle for recruiting and retaining the best talent. Now that's sort of like, that's sort of crossing over into real estate. And I think that we're starting to really reimagine what the role of the building operator, the building occupier, a company like Savills is in being a part of keeping people healthy, keeping people safe, keeping people well. And ultimately shoring up their confidence in making a return.
So Wendy, let's talk about the return. So live time right now, things are getting a little safer. Masks are slowly coming off. Vaccines are being distributed more broadly. What are you hearing or telling tenants and clients about the return to office planning, as well as planning for the future, right? Like how is that conversation going? And then also, what are you seeing in terms of increased role of, the chief people officers and human resources at the table that maybe weren't at the table before, and how important is that?
Well, I would say that, pardon the pun, that we all have had whiplash in the last week because of the CDC announcement, at least for me. Maybe you all had some insights, Rachel and Paul, but when it came out, I feel it changed a lot of thinking. We'd all been kind of doing this. Some organizations were saying we'll go back in July. Some said Labor Day, and some even said January 22. And I think that change in the mask mandate and the rollout of the vaccine has given people more confidence that they can accelerate it. But it's also blown up all of this thoughtful planning that we've been doing. And if nothing else, I think that we've learned how to be really nimble. I've learned so much in the last year and a half. It's mind-boggling. So what we're finding is our clients are starting to think about ramping it up. I think there is a recognition that people do want to go back. They just want to keep the flexibility where possible of having some remote footprint. And so these hybrid models are continuing to evolve. There is no perfect answer. There is no one size fits all. But to me, the most important thing that companies can do is, as I said, understand what the building that they're in offers from a health and safety standpoint, particularly if from the wellness and if there's a certification like WELL or Well Health Safety. And then to also think about, if they are moving, because people are, that they're going to be choosing buildings that have that. And that's going to really move the needle. So from that standpoint, that's really where people's heads are right now. And a huge part of what I do every day is this education of it. What's it about? Why should you care? And so we are finding more and more companies are finally becoming more fluent in the terminology, and they're asking about it. I'm not sure if I answered all. You had a multiple.
I just talk so much that eventually there's a question in there. So, Paul, government's not necessarily the fastest when it comes to responding to different topics of the day, let's say, right? So you're kind of leading this effort, and we've talked a little bit about science, about health, about economics. Is this ripe enough that the public sector needs to be taking a more active role, whether it's locality based, nationally at the federal level or globally in addressing this, right? Have we now percolated the conversation enough that 90% of every human's day is literally spent indoors? Public health challenges emerge from being inside and the spread is a little bit easier. Isn't this now beyond a public health kind of, not crisis, but opportunity to address these things more holistically? And then what role can you all play in kind of helping shape that conversation? Are you involved or in contact with government today? Is that something you guys spend time on? Walk us through that a little bit.
Oh yeah, we have a massive policy effort, and in fact, we have great leadership at IWBI. Folks that had worked on policy for a decade for the green building movement. You know, folks like Jason Hartke, what have you. With Rachel's leadership and the efforts we put forth, we're constantly getting leaned on by the public sector. It's interesting. I've had some fascinating conversations with policymakers, and they all recognize, you know, yes, there's been a gap in science. Yes, there's been a slow kind of response, but regardless of all that, there's only so far that general public sector mandates or guidance can get to. You're not going to get to the specific elements that are necessarily required. And that's why there's a really, really open-armed kind of feeling here with regards to PPP or leaning on private sector intelligence, if you will, and administration for that matter, of policies that matter according to kind of subject matter experts. So our International Well Building Institute has been constantly called upon to offer guidance and insights. And folks look at the research platform and say, it's not like you guys knew this was going to happen, but it's amazing how much work has been done to be prepared for it. So we've seen an embracing of the International Well Building Institute, the well building standard, the well health safety rating through and even into specific policy language. And I think Rachel can speak even more about that as to how correlated what you'll see in upcoming policy efforts and how correlated those are to the well platform being a validating mechanism of all of that.
And I mean, this was actually, you know, a lot of this came out of a Clinton Global Initiative participation that you had, right, back in the day?
Way early on, yeah, we were fortunate to have former President Bill Clinton introduce the Well Building Standard Initiative, and this was again, this was back in 2013.
13, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we've taken a bipartisan approach. The great news here, guys, is this is both sides of the aisle. Public health, and particularly public health safety, is one thing that folks won't argue about. But when you again apply the economics to this, this is about the economic benefit, long-term activity, businesses reopening, jobs. You know, this has really become something that I think is a bit different than the traditional green building or green movement in general with regards to the political divide. There is no political divide with this. And so we're seeing a really, really interesting forward landscape, whether it's obviously the stimulus packages that have been put in place, the upcoming infrastructure packages. But guys, this is an opportunity to address a decades old, if not centuries old issue. The indoor environment is not a healthy environment. Indoor air quality generally is 2 to 5 times worse anywhere in the world versus outdoor air quality. We're not hiding from pollution by going inside. So this focus and understanding, again, that the things that surround us matter, and they lead to massive, massive implications on chronic health outcomes. If you consider, just take this stat for a second, about 5% of our chronic health outcomes are genetic. Okay, what is going to happen statistically to all of us in this who are convening today? 5% of those outcomes are genetic. We cannot change that, at least not yet. Okay, so put that on the shelf. 20 to 25% of our chronic health outcomes are lifestyle and care. Here's what's fascinating: the rest. Up to 70% of all chronic health outcomes are determined by our surrounding environmental and social conditions, basically where we place ourselves, which in today's day and age is basically over 90% of that spent indoors, inside of a box called 4 walls and a roof. And so paying attention to all of those elements indoors, look, this pathogen concern will come and go, hopefully and thankfully, and others will come and go. But the bigger picture here is the fundamental relationship between you and what surrounds you, and how that impacts your respiratory, cardiovascular, immune, cognitive, digestive, and sleep health outcomes, how that impacts your productivity, how that impacts your company's ability to attract and retain, how that ultimately leads to your company's ability to be transparent on your ES&G framework, what have you. This is just a spark plug, and we've got a decades long opportunity ahead of us to improve the built environment, and it's candidly been way overlooked for way too long.
Let's piggyback on that, Rachel. Let's build upon this and focus a little bit on the health aspect of it. Two things. How are you helping to kind of educate folks on the inequitable impact of the built environment on communities of color around the country, around the world, right? Because all physical space isn't equal. And, certain people with certain resources probably have better physical indoor space, but it's not equitable. And I think COVID has highlighted just mass inequality in all aspects of society, especially as it relates to health. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then secondly, how are you thinking through and helping to advise on mental health issues as people are thinking about coming back, and how important is that? That has nothing to do per se with the built environment, but is a direct correlation to people's kind of return to the office and the whiplash Wendy talked about, and how important is all that?
Well, both are hugely important topics that IWBI finds itself sitting at the center of, just as much as the pandemic response. When I took the helm as the CEO and president of IWBI, I announced that my greatest area of focus would be on health equity. And to your point, Ken, what we have seen in this pandemic, but also what we see in virtually every other public health crisis in history, is that the people who have the least suffer the most. Marginalized communities, low-income communities suffer the most. And we have seen that across in so many different ways, not just in terms of the death toll and how COVID-19 has ravaged Black and Brown communities, for instance, in the United States and in many cases abroad, but also, in terms of like the mental health crisis that you mentioned, is also a place where we see that those communities that have the least resources are the most heavily impacted. Education. If you didn't have enough screens in your household, if you didn't have broadband internet, your child or children may have missed a year of school. And so what we've always believed, is that WELL is really designed to level that playing field. You don't have to opt in to the benefits of a WELL certification. Everybody benefits from good air quality, good water quality, improved acoustics. But we also wanted to find ways to really accelerate progress in low-income communities. We didn't want to say like that adoption curve of market transformation, eventually everybody will get to benefit. So one of the partnerships that we're most proud of is the one that we've built with enterprise community partners. We spent over a year working with the team at Enterprise behind the scenes to blend our WELL criteria into their Enterprise Green Communities certification, which is the most popular green building certification for affordable housing. It's mandated in a variety of states for affordable housing projects that get funding from the local or state level. It's incentivized in many more states. And today, when a project receives an Enterprise Green Communities certification, they also receive a WELL certification. That plaque is double branded. And so these are some of the creative strategies that we've undertaken to really try and to focus on key sectors and to focus on key communities. We've also announced recently that we're working toward the launch of a WELL Health Equity Rating. So similar to a WELL Health Safety Rating, this will be a new designation, again, taking a subset of features from the larger bank of available WELL features to create either a standalone designation or one that can be earned on the pathway toward a WELL certification. But it will specifically focus on aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, accessibility, and so forth and so on. So we've got a tremendous group of people that we've brought together. I think well over 100, maybe around 150 individuals with broad range of expertise who have raised their hands, similar to the COVID-19 task force, to advise on the creation of that. And we're doing more than 30 roundtables with outside organizations that range from ASID, Wendy mentioned them earlier, to the ACLU. And so we're really, really enthusiastic about what WELL can do to really not just raise the bar, but to level the playing field. And then your second question was about, I'm like Wendy, I can't remember your compound questions. Oh, mental health, yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, they're related, but we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. And in fact, employers this year will spend far more money on treating mental health challenges within their employee base than they will on fighting COVID-19 or treating COVID-19. And so I think this is something that we absolutely have to be cognizant of as we bring people back into the workplace, that we can either have post-traumatic stress or we can have post-traumatic growth, that almost all of us have suffered some degree of trauma during the course of the pandemic. And we've got to, as employers, as a real estate as a whole, be cognizant of those accrued impacts and really mindful about what we're going to do to address them. Creating a safe environment isn't just about addressing COVID-19 transmission. It's about really taking into account the whole person and making sure that our spaces and our policies and programs are acting in support of that whole person.
So this whole conversation really highlights that every individual, every entity, every advocacy group, including the ACLU to government, can play a role in this. But based on Paul's stat that 70% of your health situations to be by where you are, Wendy, we put people places, right? We help them figure out where their office should be geographically, by location. What role do we play, you think, as folks in the brokerage industry helping navigate the physical environment on behalf of tenants? How do we kind of help them? How should we be viewing this? How do we, further hold landlords accountable? And you talked a little bit about this with like RFPs, like that's an interesting leverage point where we're asking them and then they have to respond if they want the tenant, right? So we could softly kind of maybe move the market a little bit in a role that we should be and could be playing to kind of highlight the sector and the need for wellness, right?
Absolutely. And with what you all have created with the Well Health Safety Program, you've provided a pathway and an entry point to something that for tenants was not always as easy to embrace, but as a result of COVID and with more base buildings achieving this, it's making it a lot easier to pursue. And so part of our campaign is more ongoing efforts to demystify it, to, big terms. Biophilia is important, but what's it really mean? So I'm constantly working to come up with terms to help people understand it and wear a wellness lens. And I think that's really the thing that's been the most important to me, to my team, and I've been advocating within the company ad nauseum, which is we want to be thinking about our wellness path from once we, like even before we're hired, through move-in and beyond. It's not just a silo for one thing. And so we're really fortunate that we have some best-in-class workplace strategists, several of whom are Well AP and Fitwell ambassadors, that I don't go to any meeting without them.
And some used to work at Delos. I mean, we've got some good folks.
So we're really fortunate to have that. And so we want to integrate that thinking with workplace, with project management, to make sure that we're building the best team. And when they're hiring an architect, that we hire an architect that has experience in it. I know everyone has to learn. They just don't get to usually learn in my clients. I need them to have that experience so that we can help them get there and help people understand what's involved, how long does it take, how much does it cost, because aggregating that data has not been easy. And I've been working really hard to do that as part of my ongoing education and demystification process.
Look, I want to do a quick round robin before we wrap up. But after September 11th, security at airports was something that never changed, right? That stayed with us for the last 20 years. Post-pandemic, what do you hope from a wellness kind of angle sticks? What people have short memories. I'm back in the office now, so you kind of revert back to your old tendencies. What are you hoping kind of sticks as we move out of this and becomes kind of something that's the status quo that we build upon? Paul, why don't we start with you and maybe we'll work our way around.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. 19 years ago, those horrific people flew planes into buildings, and that changed security overnight and forever. And 20 years later, that type of event never happened, that particular type of event, but we're still dealing with the same security measures. Look, this is the same. Again, this particular pandemic and pathogen issue will come and go, and others will come and go. But I got to tell you, if you asked 100 people in the world, in the developed world 2 years ago about something like indoor air quality, okay, you'd probably get 1 out of 100 that had a thought, care, concern, opinion, or even awareness of the topic. 2 years later, that number, a year and a half later, is 99 out of 100 people, okay, in the developed world. You're going to be hard pressed to find any corner of Earth, okay, where people have not been influenced by this notion that something in the air indoors can have a very drastic effect on you, your family, your colleagues, what have you. And it's brought to light, simple things here. For instance, and we often say this, if I put a dirty glass of water in front of you, you wouldn't drink it. You've got that choice. You don't have that choice with air quality. So just zooming in on that particular topic and understanding this is not a PM 2.5 paradigm anymore, okay? Yeah. That metric is dead. You got to go much, much deeper. Pathogens matter. bacteria, mold, spores, particulates, all these ties to asthma, to influenza, to headaches, to loss of productivity, to absenteeism. Oh, and by the way, to a nasty pathogen concern. It's all interrelated. And this is, we hope, something that will shine a light on a decades, if not centuries old problem, which is the lack of focus on the built environment in terms of its impact on people. We've seen a lot of focus on the built environment and its impact on the planet. Great. The other side of the story here are the people inside our buildings. And this catalyst, again, is if there is a shining light here, it's that we can optimize our places going forward. And through the International Well Building Institute and the Well Building platform of programs, we've shown that that can scale. That can scale immediately. Start with policy. Don't even put a CapEx burden on this. Start with half of the equation, which is management and operations. And so, look, we're quite excited to see the spotlight here. The consumer awareness is a cherry on top, but this is not going away.
Right, Rachel.
Well, I'm going to build on what Paul said. It's always hard when I go second because he always takes my lines. But I think that he's exactly right, that, what we want to see come out of this pandemic, perhaps the silver lining, is holding on to this shared profound awareness of the impact of the places and spaces where we live our lives, where we spend 90% of our time, on our health, well-being, and safety. And previous pandemics tell a cautionary tale. Oftentimes at the peak of the pandemic, there's this amazing coming together of design, real estate, architecture with public health, saying like, we got to work together to solve this. And then along comes a cure, along comes the vaccine. And in certain instances in history, that fractures. And in some instances, you actually take a step backwards. And so I think that's what our consumer campaign is about. That's what the Well Health Safety Seal is about, in terms of becoming more accessible, more widely proliferated than even well itself, is like trying to make sure that we take this moment and we move forward and recognize that the spaces and places where we live our lives can not only have a profound impact on health and safety, but on our happiness and our performance as well.
All right, Wendy.
I remember the other question that you asked, and it talked about kind of wellness within companies. And there's no question that there was always thinking about it, but I don't think there's always been a connection of the dots back to the facilities piece. And that's where I'm excited to see in the post-pandemic world, as we look in the rearview mirror, that there's an understanding of this importance. And to the point that Rachel and Paul have made, it's not going away and it matters more than ever. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we inform the communities, to make sure that our clients and the market in general understand the importance of this, because people they'll feel better, they'll want to come back to the office, they're going to feel healthier. And after reading so much during this time, including Joe Allen and John McComber's book on healthy buildings, which educated me more than a lot of things about some of these aspects, it's really important. And we need to change the metric and how people think about the workplace.
Well, look, I'm so grateful to all three of you for being on Coffee with Ken. I appreciate everyone tuning in today. Next week on Wednesday, May 26th, we're going to welcome former police chief of DC and Philadelphia, Charles Ramsey, for a conversation about law enforcement in America. In the meantime, please practice social distancing, wash your hands, wear a mask, get a vaccine, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Nice to see you.